Welcome, everybody, to the Utah Stories Show. So glad to be back with you after a 2.5 week break. I went to Europe and visited my wife's home country of Bosnia. But today on the program, we had scheduled out for almost 2 months the director of the Road Home. She was going to come on, Michelle Flynn, and answer questions regarding housing first policy and some of the things we've been reporting on. Sadly to say, she has bailed out on us. She doesn't want to be on the program. She's hopefully going to be on a phone call with me. That was going to be scheduled for yesterday, but she has not responded to my emails. I'm hoping, Michelle, if you're listening, don't ghost me, please. All we want to do is find solutions to this on this program. We're not knocking anybody. We know everybody who works in the homeless arena has the very best of intentions, but we have a serious problem on our hands, and we think that it's best that everybody talk and everybody be part of the solution. So hoping to have her on, and she's definitely invited to come in studio. I'd love to have her on, and we will be courteous as we are with everybody. But instead of Michelle, I was so happy to have somebody I've been wanting to have on for a while, Samuel Grenny. He's going to be joining me a little bit later. I just want to tell you a little bit about housing first policy and give you a little bit of background into that as far as what I know. I'm not an expert on it, but what Housing First and the Housing First initiative is Utah was one of the early adopters of housing first policy way back in 2005. I think it's even older than that. But the whole concept is, if people are mentally ill or people are addicts, it's better to get them into housing first and off the streets so they can work on their problems indoors, not out on the streets. And the concept itself sounds great. I mean, of course, any mentally ill person you see on the streets who obviously is suffering, it would be much better if they're in some kind of facility or under a roof. And so that started back in 2005. The city started buying properties and converting them to what's called long-term supportive housing. And it's the whole idea that you put people into housing, but you also provide them support. You provide them the support of getting off their addictions, or you help them with their mental illness. You get them into a track of independence and self-reliance, so they can be on a track of recovery and healing. And so that started 2005. Flash forward to 2015. We declared a victory on homelessness here in Salt Lake City. It was this huge national news story where even the Washington Post, the New York Times, NBC Nightly News, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, they all came to Utah that we had successfully found the model to defeat homelessness. It was this amazing victory. And then our mayor at the time, Ralph Becker, went around the country along with Lloyd Pendleton, declaring that they had found the way to solve homelessness through Housing First. The very next year, we had an explosion of homelessness in Utah. So 2016, we saw this massive population increase in homelessness. And what apparently was happening, these are the rumors, I've never been able to substantiate the rumor, but the people in the homeless shelters were telling us one-way bus tickets from other cities were coming to Salt Lake City, sending their convicts, criminals, whoever was homeless in other cities to Salt Lake City because we had solved homelessness and we were boasting about it and we could solve their homeless problems as well. And it actually seemed to make sense, because if you look at the homeless population that was on the streets in 2016, they don't look like your typical Utahns. I mean, just from appearances, you don't definitely know for sure, but I have footage from back then, and they don't look like they're native Salt Lakers. And but if you happen to know anything about this, leave me a comment below, because I'm still trying to find out how that happened. In 1 year, we saw this massive explosion. Then we did something called Operation Rio Grande, and if you know what that is, that was basically the idea to give $68 million towards Salt Lake City to fix the homeless problem, and their major solution was to bulldoze the homeless. Like, take these camps that had been created, go in with front-end loaders, take all their crap, put it into dump trucks, take it out to the landfill, and bulldoze the homeless out of downtown. Not the best solution, but I thought that was like a temporary solution. It turns out it wasn't temporary. They've been bulldozing the homeless since 2016, nonstop. So far this year, they've done 50 abatements, they call them, where they do as I just described. They come in with big front end loaders, the county health department, the Salt Lake City Police Department, and they tell these people who are essentially just trying to squat in a empty field or a place that's kind of out of the way, and they bulldoze them out, and they just say, okay, you got to leave here. This is not safe in terms of public health and safety. And the situation is now that homeless people are camping on the sides of buildings. They're camping right in the middle of Main Street in downtown. They're camping in like the median between two roads on 300 West. And you're seeing visibly the homeless population everywhere in the main central downtown area, because they won't let them just simply camp in empty lots at all here. And we had Robin Pendergrass on the show about 3 weeks ago, New York Times photographer, saying this is atrocious, this situation here. It's inhumane. It's not at all what you would expect out of a city that's home to one of the biggest Christian church headquarters in the entire world. If you know, the LDS Church ships out over tens of millions of dollars of humanitarian aid worldwide from their headquarters here in downtown Salt Lake City. We need humanitarian aid right here in downtown Salt Lake City because these homeless people are really suffering. We had on the program a couple of weeks ago a single parent mother named Brooke who was priced out of the housing market. Her housing was doubled, and she found herself living in a tent in downtown Salt Lake City because she could not qualify for any housing. So it's a combination between people being priced out of the market, seniors, young people who can't afford homes and apartments in downtown Salt Lake City anymore, as well as people who are mentally ill, people who are addicts, people who don't want to work. You have that group of people as well. And we're going to be showing you later on in the program a homeless couple living in Sugar House Park, and their idea of how public housing should work. And I think their idea of how it should work is actually a lot more, I would say, commonsensical than the approach that we're using now. Because we did a story about, I would say about a month ago, we broke a story about the Magnolia Place apartments, which are operated by the Road Home, which Michelle could have come on the program and answered this. But the Magnolia Place apartments were $257 million apartment complex. I'm sorry, not $257 million, $17 million. Each unit cost $257,000. And those units right now, according to our source, are being used for prostitution and drug trafficking. If you look at my screen, this is the Magnolia Place. It was about $17 million under Aaron Mendenhall, 65 units of long-term assisted housing, housing first, $261,000 per unit, managed by the Road Home. And our source, who is absolutely 100% credible, says they're now being used for prostitution and drug trafficking because the people in these units aren't getting the support they need. And that's something that Jean Hill from Catholic Community Diocese, she was on the program, she said is the big problem right now. They are way understaffed, and these people are being put up, but they are not getting the support for their addiction, for their mental health. And so therefore they're just given a place to basically take all of their problems and magnify their problems in a nice neighborhood in downtown Salt Lake City where all of those problems are on display all day. And if you drive past the Magnolia, chances are you're going to see a lot of weird stuff going on. How I think Housing First should work is like Palmer Court. And I've got an example. I've got the stats from Palmer Court up on my screen now. That was done in 2009 for $1.5 million, 201 units. It cost a total of $7,000 per unit, and it's managed by the Salt Lake Housing Authority. Those are much, much lower end units, and if you are trying to get back on your feet, if you're an addict or you're suffering from mental illness, I don't think you need a luxury apartment. I think you need a very, very basic housing unit so you have an economic incentive to get yourself clean and get yourself to work. And Housing First in Los Angeles, San Francisco also costs something like upwards of $500,000 per unit. We're following that broken model here in Salt Lake City. And I don't see how anybody could look at Housing First putting drug addicts who just need to get clean, who just need basic accommodations, into luxury housing in the middle of downtown. And Samuel, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
I think that's a good segue into what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So explain the Otherside Village and how you got from doing the Otherside Academy to getting into doing this village project, which is a tiny home community for. Is it Housing First? Is it considered Housing First?
We would say that we draw on aspects of the Housing First model that we think are really important and have been proved with some pretty thorough research. But we believe we're also adding some evolutions that are much better geared towards providing people the opportunity to really take control of their lives and be empowered to reach new goals. Housing First, as such, is really a macro policy that's meant to say, how can government at the broadest level address homelessness? That's important and fits in its own place. What we're doing is trying to say, how can we take people who have been, chronically disempowered, not given control of their lives or their communities, and actually give them some of that power back and put them in a community that supports them and provides feedback and accountability.
Yeah, and I think the key aspect of what you're talking about is that word community, because I'm going to show clips later on in the program. I talked to these young people in Pioneer Park, and they're very likely drug addicts, and they're not ready to find jobs, but the point is they're there. I say, do you get an aspect of community here that you can't get someplace else? And they all say, absolutely. Like, to be able to have a circle of surrogate family members, I suppose, is the best word, where you have people watching your back. You're all in the kind of the same situation. You're all on the streets, and maybe you're all hoping for the best, but a lot of these people came through the foster care system. Mm-hmm. They were neglected or had terrible family and home lives. And is that what you believe is the key component to the tiny home community that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really nailed it with the comparison to the already existing communities on the streets. I think that's one of the least understood parts of homelessness, is the important role that those communities play in mitigating some of the vulnerability that's created for people by living on the streets, and quite often not having the same access to services like policing and other types of protection that the most of us rely on and call upon when we need it. And so, when you actually are in the streets interacting with people who are currently unsheltered, what you typically find is that there's a very strong sense of community, and there are structures that you don't see from the street when you're driving past, but that are built to deal with things like trash collection and keeping camps clean, cooking and water, and just like all of us, people who are unsheltered thrive when they have other people around them who can complement their work and their services and create multifaceted community that addresses all of the various needs that we have.
Yeah. And so this current I guess policy of the mayor's office to basically just be bulldozing the homeless out of these encampments, which they form because they keep safe. I mean, if I were homeless, I wouldn't want to be camping around other people. I wouldn't want to be out on my own on the middle of the sidewalk. Do you think that this is an answer to that policy and that problem of the homeless population just creating all these camps everywhere? Yeah,
I'll say for me personally, I think that the abatement process, the constant pushing of people who are living on the streets, has catastrophic consequences for those communities. And quite often it is one of the essential elements in keeping people in the place they're at. During those abatements, you're broken up not only from your community, but from family and friends. Oftentimes you lose precious belongings that you're going to have to go find another way to get, despite the fact that you're currently unsheltered. And so it's re-traumatizing and re-victimizing a group that is already struggling to get back on their feet. And so I understand, and I want to give credit to some of the logic behind those policies, because that's something that, for instance, business owners downtown feel like they have to ask for, because there is not a really good solution that exists because the problem is so exacerbated. But I think short, medium, and long-term abatements can really be a part of exacerbating the problem. I think, to the mayor's credit, one thing that she's tried really hard to do is start including service providers in those pushes, where they can use those as points of contact to try to attach people to services. I don't know if that's the best way to get people access to services, but I appreciate
service providers like who?
Yeah, like the Otherside Academy. Sometimes we'll go to those and say, is this an opportunity that you're looking for? And I think we can all imagine that when you're in the middle of having all of your stuff taken away and being pushed out of a place that you had just built a little bit of comfort around, it's not a great time to make large life decisions about your future pathway. But I would give Mayor Mendenhall credit for really trying to find a way to do it better than it's done in the past.
Yeah, and I've noticed that a lot of push has gone behind this Nomad Alliance. You heard about those guys?
Yeah.
They just collect supplies for homeless people.
Yeah.
I think like toilet paper, lotion, shampoo, soap, and stuff, socks, and they're helping to keep people in a more comfortable position when they're out on the streets like that. And but man, I witnessed my first abatement ever, and the cops pushed us all out. Anybody who had a camera, anybody who didn't have a camera could stay in there, but anybody who had a camera, they pushed us out. And it was the most horrible thing to sit there and watch, because here's a guy, I'm gonna show this interview later, an old couple. The guy is probably about 65, and his wife, who's suffering from, I think, liver disease, and they can't work really, but they plopped their RV in this empty lot, and all the guy can say is, you know what, I just want to thank the city for letting us stay here as long as they have. We've been here for a month. We can't afford to put this thing anywhere else. I'm just trying to take care of my wife. Yeah. And and he can't scramble to get his stuff fast enough. Yeah. And so they're taking his stuff, putting it into a dump truck while he's, scrambling to take care of his wife, and it's just like the saddest thing you've ever seen. And you can't believe this is really Salt Lake City. Yeah. This is really how we're going to treat these seniors and these vulnerable people. And it's just, I just couldn't believe it. And so this New York Times photographer, he was brought here on assignment, Robin Pendergrass, and he's decided to stay and document what's going on here in Salt Lake. Even though he could probably go someplace else now and go to other assignments, he just wants to show this is happening here, and they're not changing it. Yeah. But and I think your solution of the tiny home village is definitely right on track, but it's now taken about a year and a half longer than they thought it would. And what's been the holdup? What do you think has caused these delays for you guys?
Yeah, really, really important question. And I think, as I discuss some of the policy aspects, I want to be clear that a lot of this is going to be my own thinking and opinions, not necessarily my organization as a whole. What I can tell you is through this process, the mayor's office has been extremely supportive of our project, has been, the mayor got out in front of this project right at the beginning, and she's put her own political capital on the line and has really been an ally in moving the process along. I think the greatest thing that we can learn from how long it's taken is that this is how development works. We have put so many different checks and balances and restrictions, things from zoning to different types of permissions that you need, that it is an incredibly cumbersome and difficult process. And, on the whole, where that's left Salt Lake City is a simple supply and demand problem. So you have all of these individual actors, the unsheltered themselves, business owners, police people, politicians, who are each dealing with a different facet of this problem, but have no easy access to a good solution because it takes years and years to develop and to actually try to get supply to meet demand. And so, our project, this was our first go at something like this, so we learned some lessons in terms of timeline. But I think in terms of how quickly we've moved, a lot of people are surprised at the speed of movement. And that should terrify all of us that to deal with a crisis fast is almost 2 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you're now in the approval phase by the city council. Any sense of when you might actually be able to break ground?
We're still hopeful we'll be able to break ground this year. There's other things that can happen, and we're prepared for that whenever. On our end, we have just an incredible amount of community support from developers and different people in the development world that are ready to turn dirt for us the second that we can. We've done a lot of communication with the city council, but they have a deliberative process they'll have to enter into as well, and then we'll have a public comment period. And so we are very hopeful that all signs indicate that there is very strong community support, and we are hopeful that we'll break ground sometime this year.
Nice. I'm going to show on my screen a video of what this tiny home community is going to look like.
Yeah.
You guys ready for that? It's a really cool video and rendering. So this is like, what, 30 acres? Is that?
Right around 30 would be the total development. They'll be built in phases, but that's the whole parcel.
Cool. And you've got, so a big portion of it's dedicated to community gathering space.
Yep.
Do the tiny homes have kitchens?
Yeah, so they're fully loaded. They have a kitchen with all of the appliances that we would expect in a kitchen for cooking, a bathroom with a shower and a toilet. And so the idea is that the amenity offerings, even though the footprint might be smaller, are what any of us could look at and say, I would live here. That was the operating principle, is a home that I would live in.
And are you going to charge rent?
We will, yeah. So it will be deeply affordable housing still. Rent will be between $250 and $400, which ends up being about a third of someone's typical federal funding. And that range will depend on the square footage you want. So as you mentioned before, there is value to both having a basic standard of living that's guaranteed, but also to be able to have goals and have economic incentives to contribute and work. And so there will be opportunities for greater amount of square footage and other amenities as people see fit.
I mean, this looks really, really nice. Is it heavily subsidized at $250 to $500?
So because we will be the housing authority, I don't know if subsidy is the correct term. What we can do is, the way that we piece together funding, a portion of that will come from rent. A much larger portion of what we intend to be able to bring in to be self-reliant, that's one of our principles, is that operationally we'll be self-sufficient, is running social enterprises. So you mentioned the Otherside Academy. What they have done so well is within the first 2 years of opening their campus downtown, they became operationally self-sufficient. They were making enough money with their moving company and their other businesses to pay for their day-to-day needs.
Yeah.
That's the plan for the Otherside Village as well.
Yeah, and we had David Droscher on the program, and he talked about that. And I think besides that being no burden to taxpayers, it just makes sense, because if you're a part of a community, you are inputting your work towards that community. Mm-hmm. You're inputting your own labor towards earning something that's helping pay for what you're living in.
Yeah.
And I don't see how, if nobody works, that model or that feeling of self-worth in which enables people to get off drugs and to have more hope with their psychological issues, whatever, that they're able to do that. I mean, that just seems like such a key, common sense component to making it successful.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. There are, especially in this community, so the Otherside Village is specific to people who've been chronically homeless. For your listeners, that is people who've spent a year straight or a cumulative year over the last 3 years on the streets, unsheltered. For that community, there is, pretty significant amount of disability and mental illness. There are some folks who may just not be able to work, and so our village is built to accommodate that. But we also know, as you're saying, that one of the places that we derive the most satisfaction and gain the most in terms of personal growth is through work. Mm-hmm. And so providing opportunities for those who would like to, and providing the kind of culture that encourages it and is excited about it, I think is one of the really unique and exciting aspects of what we hope to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a little bit of time at Grace Mary Manor till they kicked me out. And I got to know a gentleman there, and he expressed to me something that I have been thinking about a lot, because he said he gets his disability check every month, and if he were to work at all, he would be severely punished. Yeah. And then if he got that job and his health went south, it's not guaranteed he could get the disability check back again. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I heard that same sentiment told to me by a guy in downtown, where these like Job Corps come out. I think they're from Department of Workforce Services, and they say to the homeless people, "Hey, we got a 1-day job. You want to come help clean the Vivint Smart Home Arena?" Mm-hmm. And he was saying he liked doing it. He definitely preferred doing that to being on the streets. And he said, "But if I do that too much, you're going to punish me, take away my subsidy, tell me I'm cheating the system because I can work, and then I'm left trying to afford housing on my own." Yeah. That, to me, sounds like a major, major conundrum. How do you get people off of the government dole and get them to being productive citizens when the penalty is so severe?
Yeah, there are huge disincentives that exist in different federal programs that do create that incentive to opt for safety rather than opportunity. And so, for each individual person, there's really good logical reasons for those decisions. And especially when you are housing insecure, the idea of being able to get to, a lot of part-time or full-time work and then sustain that might not even still pay for a place to live right now. And so it's when you kind of put all these economic factors together that you realize how disincentivizing some of this setup can be. So I also would acknowledge that we're grateful, and it's some of these federal programs are very important, because this is some of the only money that you get when you're on the streets that gives you something to work with.
Yeah, it's like your nut you need to know you're not going to go hungry.
Yep.
And I mean, I've got a family member who's been on disability, and he has a pretty legit disability with bipolar, but it's the same deal. Like, he's gotten jobs, and he knows if he works more than so there's SSI and there's SSID. This
SSDI.
guy SSDI, mm-hmm. But this guy explained to me, if you don't have that D and you earn more than even $1,000 in a year or something, you're going to lose your SSI. But if you have the SSDI, you can earn up to something like $500 and be okay. I don't know the particulars of it. Does that sound right to you?
I'm not an expert on the individual funding streams. There's a variety: SSI, SSDI, food stamps has its own limitations, and so each of them work differently. But what you're describing is generally true. There's a threshold at which you'll either start receiving reduced benefits, or with some programs would threaten your benefits entirely.
And so the Otherside Academy, which you guys already successfully operate, mm-hmm. that's a moving company, that's a thrift store. When these guys join that, are they giving up their government checks? Is that
good question? Really good question. So people who are at the Otherside Academy, I can't speak universally. I'm sure some come in with federal funding, but that's much less previously associated with benefits like that. These are typically people, the academy, who've spent long stints in prison and jail, who've been in and out of the criminal justice system, and who've been struggling with addiction for a long time. And so I can't say exactly how that works if you have federal funding and you come in, but when you enter the Otherside Academy, because it's a 2.5-year program, you are committing to being part of the house and part of those social enterprises that are what provide that self-sufficiency. And so you would not be able to continue to draw while you were there.
Yeah, because you'd have everything provided for you. Do they also pay the people who are in the program while they're there?
If you come into the Otherside Academy, so the Academy is distinct and very different from the Village in terms of operating principles. The Academy is a program that you pay nothing to enter, and working in the social enterprises is part of how you contribute to the community's success.
Yeah, you're really on board.
Yeah. The Otherside Village, this is where we consider ourselves a version of permanent supportive housing, and so we compensate for hours worked, and profits go back into making the village operationally self-sufficient, but people are paid a living wage.
Nice. All right. Well, if you got time, I'd like to play for you a clip of a homeless couple living in Sugar House. Do you have time for this?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I went to, this was actually a year ago, I went to Sugar House Park, and I was noticing on my run, I used to live in Sugar House, that I'd find homeless people just camping underneath the tunnel that goes through from Sugar House Park to, I believe it's called, not Memory Grove, Hidden Hollow, and then it goes down to Fairmont Park. And there was an increasing number of homeless people camping there. So I'm going to debut on the program this little mini documentary. It's only 4.5 minutes long. And it's about the homeless and housing situation in Sugar House, which has become it used to be this sort of hippie bohemian community. Now it's just like all super upscale, expensive housing. It's like the average price now for a home in Sugar House is $650,000. But this is beautiful Sugar House Park. Can I talk while this is playing, Alex? Nice. Yeah, you can see all this really pretty upscale housing's been built. None of it's affordable. Like this building down on the bottom of the screen is 50 plus community. This is Fairmont Park. I love this park.
Me too.
I love taking my dog there and playing there. And this is the pathway I was telling you about. Tons of people now connect Fairmont Park with Sugar House Park. And I found Dennis and Tami, who were camping out there. I'm going to stop talking now so you can hear the audio from Dennis and what he has to say.
What the mayor's doing now is just like moving everybody around all the time. Have you guys experienced that much?
Yeah. Salt Lake City was kind of strict, or it had its ducks in a row, like kind of more. I've lived in a lot of places and it seemed like more squared away places. I didn't think
is my microphone muted?
Shoot dope and camping out, fighting and shooting each other. I couldn't foresee that happening in downtown Salt Lake City. It seemed so secure
Before they did the Operation Rio Grande, and before they tore down the shelter and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it seems like while the shelter was there, the drug activity was there. If you go by the women's shelter right now, you pick up some dope, prostitute. You got Tent City down the street. You got a lot of guys hanging out there that probably shouldn't be hanging out there. That maybe some of the women are even hiding from. I know at the YWCA, I'm not telling anybody, you can sneak guys in there and stuff. My brother gets snuck in there sometimes. Shit.
No kidding.
Yeah, we know some.
Have you heard of tiny home communities?
I have. Yeah, actually, in Petaluma, a while back when they were making that first tiny home, that guy was doing the documentary. But yeah, that sounds pretty awesome, But it's again, I'm gonna have to agree with the people on just the mass, and the upkeep on it. If it can be kept up, that'd be pretty cool.
Where's Petaluma?
It's in they call it North Bay area, California.
Oh yeah. It looks like that might actually happen. Yeah, here.
Yeah, but I think there should be a few of them, different ones, in different areas, and maybe make it like a kind of like, you got your nicer area, people that are doing well. You got your medium kind of middle class area, and then you got where the bad people have to go stay. You know, like where they, if they can't keep up their maintenance and their obligations, maybe they can't afford to live in the nicer one. It's just like
yeah, just make it clear, if you can get off, you know, whatever chemical problem you've got, you can go to here, but if you, in the meantime, you stay here.
So the first, like, you can go to sign up for your program or whatever, and you're still on the chemical, you're going to the ghetto, you know, and then until your what, parts per million or whatever, or until your UA starts to show better results, you know, that's the life you're living. And then maybe once you're doing a lot better, it seems like you're kind of starting to come out of the fog, maybe you can go up a level, you know, and then from tiny home, village, the third one, you know, maybe once you got that under control, you don't need them anymore. You can get on your own feet, get into a regular house.
Yeah.
That sounds actually like a pretty good idea.
Okay, so that audio was pretty terrible. But what Dennis explains here is he's a drug addict. He told me that, and he said that when you're a drug addict, you really needed a great incentive to get off. And hitting this idea of called rock bottom, it means typically you are just surviving to do drugs. And what he's saying is that putting drug addicts into nice housing doesn't make a lot of sense. It should be you go to the ghetto when you are strung out using drugs, so you have an incentive to get a place that's like a tiny home, that's got a bathroom, and then maybe once you're established a little while longer, you get a place that's got like a bathroom and a kitchen, so that there's kind of a built-in economic incentive to get clean, to become productive, to get a job. I think that's all built into the Otherside Academy. But is that part, should that be part of Housing First? Is that part of the thought process that goes into Housing First, that it should still be stratified, but like real life, and that you get better accommodations as you get better along your recovery process?
Yeah, so taking our model first, and our naming is confusing. So the Otherside Village is who I'll be talking about. The Otherside Academy is the 2.5-year program that has a less specific focus on chronic homelessness and mental illness. So I think he's in many ways describing some of the aspects that we think will work well about our model. We would say that essential amenities like bathroom, like kitchen, are actually really important for people to even be able to get up back on their feet and begin that process. And so that's why any of our units would have those. But additional amenities, things like a porch, things like more space, more storage, those are wonderful opportunities that aren't essential to our thriving, to say, hey, there is incentive and a motivation to work a little more, do a little better.
And probably you take people who already have a really strong incentive to get clean. Do you screen them somehow that way?
We screen for, so the way that will work when we are set up and running is that the interview process will be conducted by residents of the Otherside Village. We call them neighbors, and neighbors will have the opportunity to interview a prospective candidate and ask them and make sure that they're serious about maintaining community standards and protecting the neighborhoods that they join. And so I think that part is really important to understand. It connects to our previous conversation, where one of the problems with the communities that form on the street is that they are so vulnerable to being preyed upon. So I think quite often it's misunderstood, and people think about homeless people and criminals as highly overlapping categories. And there's some of that, of course. But the truth is, when you talk to people who spend time in these camps, that quite often the victimizers are people who come from the outside, who know how to exploit these camps, and also know that these are places that police are less likely to respond to, that have less access to protection. Yeah. So if you want to do horrible things to another human being, you know the population to go to. They're not hard to find. Yeah. So the beauty of the Otherside Village model is putting that power back into people's hands to set standards for their community and enforce those standards. Which
actually I saw that happening. Do you know about that Fort Pioneer that was under the 6 South off ramp, where it got to be about 130 people?
for Pioneer, I know Camp Hope.
Yeah, I think it might have gone by that name as well.
Yeah, yep.
But it was
Ty Bellamy was part of it. Yeah,
and Stacy Johnson.
Yeah.
So they had in place sanitation to a degree, not great.
Yeah.
But I mean, they had dumpster. They had sort of like a place where people could empty out their 5-gallon buckets when they would defecate. I mean, that's much better than, of course, going in a hole.
Yeah.
Then they had a warming area. They had a place where people could charge their cell phones. And that camp was enabling people to go and get jobs and work. And it was like helping people get their feet back on the ground. And I think that component of the community running it, like Stacy Johnson told me, they made the rules.
Yeah.
If they needed somebody to be kicked out because they were partying all night using drugs, they'd kick them out.
Yeah.
Because took ownership over the community. And I think that's what the resource centers are lacking in. They've got these authoritarian people who screen you at the door, look at all your stuff at all times, have cameras everywhere. Everybody I've talked to said it feels like a prison. I think the community has to form and create the housing situation that they're in. And did you guys develop that model from somewhere else or get that idea from another place that's doing that already?
Yeah, we've drawn on a couple of programs that have been very successful around the U.S. and around the world. But this part of our model really just comes out of the therapeutic community. So the Otherside Academy, the Otherside Village will both be different versions of what we call a therapeutic community, which is just about peer-led processes, about saying that real change will happen when peers are influencing peers and there's a culture of improvement that exists. And so at the Otherside Academy, for instance, you had Dave DeRocher on. He doesn't have a doctorate. He doesn't have, he didn't go to some fancy school. He's a former drug addict and criminal who understands drug addict and criminals. And when somebody enters the Otherside Academy, especially people from this background, I happen to be from this background as well, when we sit across from people in white lab coats or have badges on, we immediately disregard a lot of what they tell us because we don't believe that they understand who we are and where we come from. The empowerment of the peer-led community comes from the fact that when someone enters the Otherside Academy, which will also be the case at the Village, they see Dave DeRocher and they realize that's them just a few years in the future.
Yeah.
And that this is possible because someone else who's walked in their shoes have done it. And the whole community functions based on peers who are further and further along taking ownership of that community and providing leadership. And so really the Village is just a natural evolution on that to say, hey, how do we take a different population that has unique needs? And really important for your listeners to understand, the Village will have very different operating principles because we're serving a different population with different needs. But that being said, the part where you say, hey, let's empower and listen to those who are facing the problems themselves, there isn't a more powerful or a better way to go about finding a solution. Nobody knows better and no one is more committed to solving the problem than the people who are suffering from it right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that makes so much sense. And it's which is just I just can't believe that it's just not getting done more quickly. I guess that's the only thing I don't understand. But I wanted to go back to the drug epidemic we're facing right now. Fentanyl is streaming over the borders. We've got so many people addicted to drugs. And the way Stacy Johnson explained to me is like, not every homeless person is a drug addict per se, but everybody in the homeless community is going to be dealing with their problems using drugs and alcohol. And everybody, and then she made the point, everybody in suburbia does as well. If you have a really bad day, you tend to drink an extra glass of wine.
Very important thing to point out.
Yeah, and she said you might call your drug, Seroquel. Well, we call it a hit of meth. And it's one is illegal, the other is legal. But the point is, like, how do you get people off the streets and clean? When your Otherside Village will be awesome, but what's that 300 people can live there, and we probably have 7,000 on the street right now. What's the bigger solution to get more people off the streets and off drugs? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I think, I can speak to what we believe we're innovating in our model that I think really will contribute to the difficult problem of helping people improve their lives at the same time with things like dealing with significant addiction at the same time as dealing with the problems of homelessness itself. I think, from a policy perspective, dealing with the addiction and dealing with the housing, they're overlapping problems, but they also require unique and individualized solutions. And so
definitely.
something like that, the housing first, as we talk about it, it's a very loaded term because it's been implemented very differently in different places, and there's a lot of disagreement about what the results of that have been based on that wide variation. The original model, which was developed in New York, that's called Pathways to Housing First, is all about robust access to services after you're housed. They're voluntary access, but what it is saying that once you provide people that safety and stabilization of being housed, over time they will start to want to address those problems and be able to, reach their own dreams and their own goals. And so what you do is you make sure that they have robust and consistent. Consistent is really important because when you live on the streets, you might have access to services, but it's sporadic, it's random. Oftentimes they're different service providers. And so Pathways to Housing First was so successful because they had really robust, consistent service providers that would come
which
in.
You, of course, absolutely need.
So essential. And the thing to understand with the rollout of Housing First across the U.S. and across the world is that different municipalities, different states have picked and chosen which parts are important and they want to stick and which parts they'd rather not fund. And the hardest thing to fund is a permanent commitment to long-term service provision. And so if you're looking at a way to cut the budget and make things easier for the fiscal year, what you're going to cut out is that service provision. It's also the most difficult to provide. We don't pay people who work in care very well. And even those who are in there, the service provision itself is very difficult. Quality service provision matters. And so it's much easier to want to build housing than it is to try to solve the problem of the economics of the care industry.
And when we had Dave Droscher on the program talking about Otherside Academy, the model of peer-to-peer, your peers are your counselors, essentially. He says they're not hiring professional paid psychologists or psychiatrists. It's like you're getting motivation and support from your peers. I mean, that model is also the AA model. I don't believe there's any, professional alcoholic addiction specialist that you can hire to. It's your peers. And I just think that's got to be the way to go.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. And what we see, what we were nervous about a lot of the so-called tiny home communities in the U.S., we use cottage home for ourselves to try to distinguish because a lot of these are tough sheds that are going up. Even those that are providing decent housing are not being intentional about building culture around that. And we think that peer-led process is so essential to developing a culture that can protect long-term the assets that are created. To go to the academy point, you're exactly right about how the academy works. There is not a professional member of the staff there. There isn't anyone who dispenses medication. Really important to understand at the Village, we will take that same peer process that exists. We're already doing it right now. We have a version of our welcome neighborhood, we call it, that we're operating, that we have neighbors that are members of the community. So we'll build that culture really intentionally and empower those neighborhoods to take control of their neighborhood. But we'll also have partnerships, like we already have one with Valley Behavioral Health, where they will come in and use our state-of-the-art facilities to provide some of the other types of services that people from this population really do need. Nice. The academy is not set up to help people who need high-level psychiatric care or who need to be dispensed significant medication. They can't accept those people. That was part of the impetus for us wanting to start the Village, is to say, dang it, there's this whole group of people that right now are not able to benefit from the beauty of the therapeutic community model. So how do we modify it in a way that allows us to provide robust, consistent access to services while also maintaining, as you described, the absolutely essential element that is the peer process?
Yeah. Man, there's so much more I'd like to talk about. Why don't we take a little break right now, and we'll see how much time you have left, because I'd like to know your personal story,
Yeah.
and I'd also like to talk about NIMBYism and how that's preventing more tiny home communities from popping up. But let's take a little break right now, and we'll be back in a few moments. Cool.
I got nothing but time.
I was thinking we'd just go maybe 15 more minutes. All right, we're back with Samuel Grenny. We're talking about the Otherside Village, and we're going to be getting to your questions. We've got some really good questions already. I'm excited to answer. We're going to do that in about 10 or 15 minutes. If more questions come on track, or you think of something you want to ask us, we'll get to all of those in about 10, 15 minutes. But I want to talk more about this whole idea of tiny home villages or tiny home communities, where developers right now are having a major issue of building deeply affordable housing, because they're attached to current building costs, which are like $200 a square foot. Mm-hmm. And when you're attached to the current building cost of that threshold, you just simply cannot do the math. You can't. It doesn't work, because you're going to be trying to build something that's going to need to be heavily subsidized. And the idea with tiny home communities is, I think, first of all, anybody could take a tough shed and turn it into a housing unit, mm-hmm. or anybody can build a smaller scale housing unit if they're given permission outside of the current zoning laws. Mm-hmm. But the current zoning laws are that you need to be on 1/8 of an acre. The home square footage has to be dictated to be a certain amount. All of the requirements for insulation, for electrical, plumbing, all have to follow code. And that prohibits affordable housing from being built. So the biggest hurdle you guys have gone through has got to have been getting zoning changed. Can you talk a little bit about that hurdle and how you have been able to get through it?
Yeah. So we did have to apply for a zoning change. We ended up going in front of the Planning Commission, I think November of last year, and we got an 8-1 vote, I believe it was. And I think it was one abstention, to be fair. But, that process, the zoning specifics are extremely rigorous and very specific. And so we were pushing for a form zoning that gives us much more flexibility in being able to do mixed use development, have both the cottage home style concept, and then also to have businesses and amenities that are offered, and our clinics, and we'll have a vet on site. And so that process is so laborious because those zoning regulations are so laborious, and the amount of red tape that exists, and just the amount of straight up prohibitions that exist depending on where your land is. It is, a core to the problem of homelessness. And I think what's hard about this is that there isn't the same incentive that exists for people who'd like to see reduced zoning requirements as there is for people who'd like to see more zoning requirements. And so there just is a total imbalance in terms of political power and voice. But really, at the end of the day, one of the biggest solutions long term to homelessness would be just to free the hands of developers.
Yeah. And something I've been considering and going out and talking to these homeless people. Yesterday I was talking to people at Pioneer Park. I probably won't have time to show that this show, but I'll show it next show. But these people come out, they give clothing, they give supplies, they give food. And there's people in Utah, I think, are really, really generous. I mean, we see homeless people and we want to give stuff to them. But the thing that I don't see that we're doing is we are not giving up our NIMBYism. We think a homeless or a housing community for chronically homeless people sounds great, but just not in my backyard. And so you faced problems of people saying, yeah, that's awesome, but just don't do it here. And that took quite a long time, and you were getting quite a bit of pushback. Is that correct?
Totally correct. Yeah. And, I think that the best way to understand a complex problem like this is to really do justice to each perspective. And obviously, I'm on the side of YIMBY and development. I believe that it's essential for the well-being of our community to start pushing in that direction. And at the same time, I understand that so much of our value in life is tied up in home ownership. And here in the United States, that's where generational wealth comes from, is the land and the home that you have. And so what's on the line for people is so much more than, will things look the way I want them to, or is it going to be inconvenient for me? People feel things like that as a threat to what they hope to give to their kids and where they hope to retire. And so I think, really at the heart of that problem is this conflict between individuals really logically trying to protect their most important asset and a community that needs to deal with significant entrenched problems. So we're all about YIMBYism and really the West Side, where we're hoping to join. As we've done some deliberate outreach, we've been able to connect with people who've really opened up and both shared their feedback and their concerns, and we've been able to adjust our model accordingly, but who've really been become advocates for us as they've understood some of the ways that we're being deliberate about protecting their assets. So I want to give credit to that. But yes, it is true that NIMBYism is, you cited the number of LA development earlier. The reason it's so expensive is because they pick sites and they go through 6-8 month processes trying to get those sites developed, and they aren't even ever able to develop that site. They have to move on to another one because there's such effective local opposition. And so it ends up that for every unit, every 10 units they try to build, they build 1 or 2, and that makes the cost 10 times more expensive. So that local control is really just devastating our communities at the larger level.
Because it seems like when you do get this done and get it built, immediately we're going to need 10 more. We needed them 10 years ago, quite honestly. We're decades behind development. And talking to, young professionals who are, getting started, getting their feet on the ground, like I was 20 years ago, I was able to buy a house for 120 grand. I was able to put roommates in it, and they paid my mortgage basically. And that was one of the greatest things I was able to do as a young person, to be able to start my own business. And it's like, I think everybody should have that opportunity. And the only way people are going to have that opportunity is if they stop saying no to in my backyard. Realize, go look at Europe. In Europe, zoning is nowhere near like we have here. We have what's called Euclidean zoning. There they have truly mixed zonings, where poor people or lower end housing units can be right next to big expensive housing units. And it's not a crazy situation. It's like you can have an apartment next to a house. You can have tiny homes next to suburban homes. You can do it, and it's actually makes the community way more vibrant, way more interesting to walk around. We moved to the suburbs like 2 years ago, and I gotta say, it's just kind of boring to walk around suburbs compared to Sugar House and every older neighborhood where the zoning didn't exist when they designed it. It's way more interesting, and your strata of the people you see around you are way more interesting. So anyway, that's like a personal pet peeve and bone I gotta pick. I think people just got to chill out and allow these communities to exist. And I wanted to hear more about your story and your dad's story, because I heard about Delancey Street a long time ago, and I thought it sounded too good to be true. And then when you guys actually started it, the Otherside Academy, and made it such a success, and to see what it is today, how did your dad decide to bring that idea here, And then how have you been a part of it, and what is your story?
Yeah, great question. I'll try not to be too long-winded because the answer is long. So my dad, Joseph Grenny, is an author who was in the organizational development world. Him and his partners were working on a book called Influencer, their third publication. And they were studying, as a part of that, positive deviation, models that have taken problems and actually been successful at addressing them in ways that are better than average. And the theory behind the book is that if we look at those positive deviations, we can find what's unique about what they're doing and figure out how to apply that more universally. One of the most important models that they studied during that period was Delancey Street. Delancey Street, if you've spent any time in the world of criminal justice or drug addiction and rehabilitation, their success rates are astronomical. It's unheard of to have a place that has the kind of success for those who commit to the model that Delancey Street has. And so they studied it in Influencer, set that aside, and continued with their work. And then in the early 2010s, I went to jail. I got arrested in Utah County for possession of marijuana and cultivation of other substances, and spent 5-6 years in and out of jail in the criminal justice system. And in my longest stint, near the end of that time, I was spending time with a few people. Early on, I just kind of went in and out of jail. As I actually had longer stints, it really more forced me to get to know and become friends with these groups of people that I really probably wouldn't have spent time with in my life otherwise. And in those conversations, I just started to realize, it's silly to say out loud, but nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to leave jail and continue to use and be stuck in addiction and reoffend. That's not people's chosen pathway. It's that there are really not good alternatives. And so one guy in particular, but a handful of people that I would talk to, just had the most sincere desire to change I'd ever encountered. They just didn't have the right resources. So my dad would come visit me in jail, and in conversations with him, he decided to work out. My uncle was also county DA at the time in Utah County. They built a little pipeline where a few guys were able to defer their sentences and go to Delancey Street in California. Through that process, my dad decided and realized that it would be crazy to keep sending people to California instead of just starting our own here. And so he actually went out and found a handful of Delancey Street graduates who'd been very successful, who had also helped build Delancey Street through their participation there. Dave DeRocher, who spent years beyond his minimum requirement at Delancey Street in a leadership position, various leadership positions, and brought them here to both start the model and try to innovate parts of it to make it even better. So that was really, kind of the impetus. Started in 2015. It's now grown to over 100 people living on campus there. They've taken over a good chunk of that block, revitalized a couple of flop houses, and just made it a beautiful place.
Yeah, and the coolest thing is probably the people who might have been the NIMBYs back then, they love it. Everybody in the community loves that place on 7th East.
Yeah.
It's 7th East. It's like a couple blocks to the north of Trolley Square. And
First South.
It's just an awesome area now. My office was just down the street for 8 years back then. And I saw it kind of come along. And
Yeah, and the best part of the model is you think of somebody like Dave DeRocher, who you can't even quantify the impact that he's now having in human lives. And over the last 7 years, much less before that has had, he would still be in prison today if it wasn't for Delancey Street.
Yeah.
Not only did it defer it, he would actually still be doing time being that same guy. And so
completely turning around people's lives.
Yeah,
it's just amazing.
The impact that it can have and the ripple effect that has it's exponential.
Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome. I think what you guys are doing is truly great.
Thank you.
And yeah, I wish you all the best success. But we got some questions. So let me go through these. Rocky Mountain Bear asked, what are the leading causes of homelessness in 2022? Man, that's a tough one. I can't say I know. Do you know, Sam?
I won't say that I know, but I'll say I have some theories. And these are my personally. I think, there are aggravating factors and risk factors that we often talk about as being causal, things like drug addiction and mental illness. I think the main causal driver is the supply and demand problem. When you exist in a community that does not have enough housing and is underinvested in housing for multiple decades, it's the most vulnerable, those who are on the closest to the rung from being knocked off, that are knocked off first. Who are those people? People who are addicted to drugs, people who have mental illness, and people who cannot navigate complex systems on their own.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have a friend who, for years, was known as affectionately as Crazy Mike, because he had schizophrenia. But he was a great guy, and he'd always help me paint. He'd always help me fix up houses, and we loved the guy. But he found himself homeless, living in warehouses, living out by the train, and he's just sort of disappeared, and I don't know where he is. And
I think of myself hitting the housing market when I was 18 or 19 years old. Luckily, I had all these support pieces, but it freaked me out. It's complicated and hard, and when you're a person who already has difficulty with that, and who quite often, when you're in front of a landlord, look like a less desirable candidate, housing starts to become impossible when you're competing with people who are just easier or better at attaining housing.
Yeah, and it's like the lowest, like you said, the lowest rung are the people who are suffering from mental illness and addiction. He had both. He's alcoholic and schizophrenic. But yeah, it's got to be that. So then Kimberly asks, so which neighbor is the ones you think is the ghetto you plan to set up? And I would like to have you answer which neighborhood here you consider worthy of being dubbed the ghetto. I use that word because that's the word Dennis used. Like, if you are strung out on drugs, you're not getting off. You don't want to get off. I just don't see a really nice housing unit being the answer to all your problems. Of course, being housed is. Of course, there's no slums or ghettos in Salt Lake City, and that's actually the problem. If it used to be, my parents were in real estate. It used to be everything west of 7th East was like the ghetto. And the Sugar Hood got that nickname because you were west of 7th East and you were in the hood. And now it's just like super nice there. And it's just like young millennials fixing up every single house. And to say that, there's no ghetto anymore, I don't know that that's necessarily such a great thing. I mean, and the other thing is, like, I don't remember when I was growing up there being any homeless people beyond Pioneer Park. I don't remember ever there homeless having to try to survive on Main Street, camping out there, because there was always more ghetto areas that they could filter into. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think, generally our country has moved towards this principle that, there's a minimum standard for housing, and it's great that we have some of that, but we've decided that anything that's below that should just not exist. And when you live in a community that experiences a great amount of homelessness, it starts to feel kind of crazy to say, well, okay, if it's not this threshold, we just won't have it, and people will live on the streets instead. So, SROs, single room occupancy, is a really good example of this. Super prevalent 100 years ago. That was where you would move to if you were, kind of
like
transitory,
tenement housing, right?
Or shared services like shared bathrooms, other things that are not super desirable, and we don't want them to be catastrophic or dangerous. Regulation is good, but when regulation comes at the expense of having more houses and more beds, that trade-off becomes insane. To say that people are better off sleeping in the streets all the way out in the elements is better than not having some of the amenities that make you and I comfortable. That becomes a really problem, and it kills the housing mix. We don't have the same housing mix anymore because we don't have the same options.
Yeah. And that goes back to the decision of tearing down the road home, which had 1,100 beds. I mean, those people would rather be in dormitory style beds than out on the streets freezing to death. There's no question about it. Joe asked something similar to Kimberly. He said, is there a ghetto-type neighborhood in Salt Lake City, L.A., NYC, or Chi-Town, but Salt Lake City would not have a single hood dubbed ghetto? Yeah, I agree. It just doesn't exist. You used to be able to say Rose Park maybe, or Glendale, but I have a cousin who lives there. Glendale's a really cool neighborhood now. It's really nice there.
Love Glendale.
Kimberly again commented on a question. Just the reason I was upset by the term ghetto applied to Salt Lake City anywhere, yet seems many who have lived here in Utah have no problem dubbing certain neighborhoods as just like the Poplar Grove where I live. Yeah, I mean, Poplar Grove's right next to Glendale. It's just super nice there now.
Love Poplar Grove too.
Yeah, you just can't find any slums or ghettos. So I would think that would be a great thing, but when people are sleeping out on the streets who are priced out of the housing market, like I found a single parent mother who her rent was doubled in Utah County. She came to Salt Lake thinking she'll find a place eventually. She couldn't find a place. She lives in a tent, and you can watch that video on our YouTube channel. But thank you so much, everybody, for the questions, and thanks so much for your support. If you want to support this program and support Utah Stories in general, this is our Hidden Utah issue. It's on paper. And for those of you who are not familiar with magazines, you flip them, and there's no operating system required, no electricity required. These come from trees. And the reason why, there's this like alarmist view of holding a paper product, but the paper is coming from trees. That's a scarce resource. And if we don't apply it to magazines, I guarantee you Amazon is going to close down more paper mills and turn them into cardboard mills. And that's our problem. Our printing costs have doubled since COVID because Amazon is literally shutting down paper mills and turning them into cardboard mills because there's not enough paper products. We want to continue to print Utah Stories magazine because we think there should be information printed on paper that Facebook and Google and Twitter cannot censor. We think that's a really important principle. So if you want to support our efforts here, subscribe to Utah Stories magazine. $2 for a month, $24 for the entire year. That could help us out a lot. All right, thank you so much, Sam, for being on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Great conversation. Okay, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.